If you're a small business owner, you'll know just what it's like to be the chief everything officer. HR, payroll, employee benefits. Well, Gusto can do all of that for you. Gusto is online payroll and benefits software built for small businesses. It's all in one, remote friendly, and incredibly easy to use. It's quick and simple to switch to Gusto. Just transfer your existing data to get up and running fast. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/lockedonsoccer and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's gusto.com/lockedonsoccer.
The world's biggest soccer tournament has arrived, and you can trade the entire tournament on Kalshi. On Kalshi, you can trade every match from the opening stage all the way to the final. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code CUP26 to get $10 when you trade 10. KALSHI Kalshi. Trade the beautiful game. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory.
The entire summer of soccer is on PrizePicks, all 48 countries in every matchup. And if you rep your side before the round of 16 on PrizePicks, you can win a trip to the finals in New York. It's the biggest tournament ever, which means there's even more opportunities to cash in while you root for your favorite national sides and global soccer stars. Download the app today and use code CUP26 to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Download the app today and use code CUP26 to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. PrizePicks, America's #1 sports picks app.
Hello everyone and welcome to Howie the Podcast. It's Gav and you join us for another pod. It's the middle of the week as we record this, and Sunderland is never boring, as I like to say more often than not, and it's definitely not boring at the minute with pre-season starting, lots of other bits and pieces coming up. And I'm joined by two gentlemen today to chat about all of these things I've got on my mind. First up, it's Chris Wynn, who, as we were just chatting about before we came on there, Chris, you never get to do this very often, sitting on the other side, and you've got a bit of the nervous ghoulies, haven't you?
I have. I normally know where I am. I normally know where I stand, and I know what's coming up. I know the questions. I know what my replies are going to be. I've got it all planned out, and I've got the butterflies because I don't know what you're going to ask me. You could ask anything.
Well, I'm not going to throw anything too daft at you, mate. Although I have just been listening to you on the second part of the summer quiz, which I was waiting to get caught up on, and I was listening to you throw the curveballs at the lads there. So maybe I owe you one on their behalf. I don't know.
Yeah, we were talking the other day about maybe getting another one going because Martin, I don't think Martin was particularly happy, especially he got one question wrong from 1990, which I think he's still fuming about. But yeah, I think Martin wants to get his own back because Kelvin came from behind and to win in the last round. And even though we snuck another one in at the end, Kelvin still came out on top. So Martin's desperate for another one.
So anybody who hasn't listened to it yet, there's a spoiler alert for you that Chris just gave you there.
Sorry. Well, you might be even more surprised because of how it went.
Absolutely. Also with us today is a friend of the pod who's probably had numerous hat-trick balls now, been on more than probably anybody, I think. It's Nick Barnes from BBC Radio Newcastle. Hello, mate.
Hello.
How are you? How are you keeping
I'm
this
good.
summer?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's been a good summer. I've been enjoying the World Cup, what I've seen of it. I mean, the haphazard kickoff times have been challenging. I mean, strangely, I've not yet watched France and get a first opportunity to watch them. And of course, they're one of the teams that everyone's talking about as being potentially World Cup finalists. But just because of the array of kickoff times and everything I've been doing, but what I've watched and what I've seen, and I think everybody's embraced it after all the initial fears about how it might well go. It all seems to have gone on the whole, very well. The case that's controversies inevitably, but that fear about stadiums not being full and so on doesn't seem to have come to pass. All the stadiums that I've seen have all been full, and the atmosphere has been fantastic. So, yeah, long may that continue for the next week and a half.
That seems to be the case every time there's a tournament, doesn't it? It seems to be, this is not going to work. That's not going to work. What about this? What about that? And then the players just play the football. It was the same with the England game the other day, wasn't it? When all the chat going into it was about altitude, and then they put in a performance like that where just even it was in my head before the game. I'm sitting there going, oh, but the altitude, how they're going to cope with it, and they just breeze past it. And sometimes you forget, don't they? These are professionals at what they do. They're very well managed. And it wasn't like, with 4 years to prepare for this tournament, they hadn't given a second thought about whether or not we might actually play games in Mexico. So, you kind of do have to remind yourself of that. But it's made it a bit more interesting for us. It put certainly the England performance, it gave it a little bit of jeopardy, didn't it?
I actually thought when I looked at the list of fixtures for that series of games that England's was the hardest. I thought just their luck, they've managed to get Mexico City in the Azteca, and that was probably I'd argue the toughest of all the ties in that round. But then you just sort of alluded to there. Sometimes you've just got to take a step back, and now the technology and the background staff at all these international teams and Premier League teams, etc., is phenomenal amount of staff that are there to deal with all those eventualities, including altitude, including playing in the sort of conditions they had to in Mexico City the other night. It's funny enough, a friend of mine, Mick Wadsworth, who used to manage Carlisle United, we got him onto the breakfast show the other morning because he, as well as working with England with Bobby Robson, he managed the Democratic Republic of Congo for 3 months.
All right.
And he was saying when he was manager of them, they were in absolute disarray. They couldn't train in the Congo because it was too dangerous. They had to train in Egypt. The players didn't want to play for Congo because of the dangers. Most of them were from France. They had no balls. They had no kit. And he said, look how far the Democratic Republic have come now to where they were the other night when they played England. And he pointed out, about all the backroom teams, the staff and everybody now, with every country, not just England, all the countries, it's highly sophisticated is probably the wrong word, but that these are well-oiled machines now. And I think it's no surprise. I mean, in some ways it's a surprise, but in other ways it's not. That is it 6 European teams in the last 8 of the World Cup?
Yeah.
Which is remarkable, bearing in mind everyone was talking about the temperatures and the altitudes and everything they would have to face in the heat of America and Mexico. And yet European teams are the ones that are dominant.
Yeah. Have you enjoyed it, Chris? I know you've chatted a fair bit over the summer like I have, but have you been getting into it? Because I said a few times that I was finding it tough, certainly at the start anyways, with the amount of games I was missing. But now that it's starting to wind down and the kickoff times are relatively sensible, I feel like I'm getting into it a bit more now. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's always the same, isn't it? When you get past the group stage, excuse me, and you get onto the knockouts, isn't it? It's like it's a bit like the Champions League. That the group stages, you just feel like it's a bit of a formality. Bit like the Pizza Cup, I suppose, back in the day as well. You just don't care about the group stage. You get into those knockouts. But it's true, and there's the fact that there's not as much jeopardy as well. I just noticed Nick's sporting a lovely Italia 90 t-shirt there, which I'm very jealous of because that was my first World Cup. But I remember in that one, it's funny because I was telling my lad that after the first 2 games of England's group stage, all 4 teams were on 2 points, that scored 2 goals and that conceded 2 goals. All 4 teams going into the last game. And it was Mark Wright's header that sent us through. And Republic of Ireland knocked the Dutch out as well. But there was an element of jeopardy. It was almost like the group stages then were like knockout stages, whereas obviously with the third place and expand it and all, you can lose a couple of games or something and still kind of scrape through or still have a chance of scraping through. It was funny when Scotland did their usual Scotland thing, and there was still, which I've noticed Benitez has been linked with a job, which is just incredible. But anyway,
Scotland.
Yeah. He's been linked with a job. But anyway, even after they did Scotland things, there was still stories of saying, "Oh, they've got 8% chance of qualifying," all this sort of stuff. Right? So it's just a bit ridiculous. And going into England's game in Mexico, you're right, Gar. I mean, everyone was going on about the altitude, but it was funny because you could almost compare the altitude with everyone telling us about Ellen Road under the lights. It's a bit like that, isn't it? It's like, oh, you'll never beat Leeds under the lights. Nobody beats them. Nobody beats Mexico there. But no, the lads did it. So yeah, I'm getting into it. And like I said, with a kind of teenage lad and his kind of, well, say first World Cup really, where he kind of knows what's going on and he's following it. It's now starting to kind of heat up a bit. And yeah.
It's funny because you mentioned 1990 being the first. I remember I'm showing my age here. I remember 1982, and you were talking about group stages.
Mm.
And I remember being incredibly indignant that England went out of the group stage having not lost a game,
Yeah.
because they played. I think they drew the 3 games, and
Yeah.
I think was that one of them. Brian Robson did his shoulder in the first minute or so, one of them, and they drew the 3 games and got knocked out. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. They haven't lost. They should be still in the competition. So there was, that jeopardy, as you say, with the smaller competition and the group stages.
I just made us think then, Nick, have you ever done international football commentary at all? Like covered out?
No, only
No?
I've done European football, but not done international.
Has that never been on your bucket list to maybe go to a World Cup and do something?
No, I mean, the nearest I got to it, in a sense, was I went to London to work for BBC Sport in 1998 to cover for those that were going to the World Cup. So I became a broadcaster for BBC Sport that summer. So did a lot of World Cup stories, because that was the story at the time. But I think because of covering the football all season and everything, the summer was always like this precious break. You get a break and an opportunity to wind down, and I've never sort of had that hunger to do a World Cup as such, because I've actually always enjoyed watching it. So
Right, yeah.
growing up as a kid, my summers were always sitting down and watching every game, and so I've always seen it as my guilty pleasure, if you like, is the summer to watch a World Cup, rather than it become a busman's holiday, if you like.
Yeah, I've even just watching the coverage on TV, you see how many of it's the same pundits that are always doing the games, and you think, bloody hell, they're away from home for like 6 weeks at a time. It must be a lot, for some
Not the
people that
BBC,
might be a
not the
good thing.
BBC lot.
Well, the commentators have made the trip over, but not the pundits in the studio. So that's been quite interesting, hasn't it? Kind of, because who was it who said on the TV the other day that they would have loved to have been in the stadium while they were doing the commentary on the game. I can't remember who it was now. But yeah, I mean, kind of bring it round to Sunderland, Nick, I guess. I mentioned there at the start there, you've been BBC Radio Newcastle's Sunderland match commentator for, what, 20 odd years now has it been?
2026, 2003, I started as 23 years.
Bloody hell, 23 years. So, this current era for me, and we've said this repeatedly, it's the best I think I've ever seen. Would you say that it does rank at the highest point since you took over as the match commentator?
I think so. I mean, there've been seasons, I suppose, that you look back at and you think, they were enjoyable seasons. I think the year they finished 10th with Steve Bruce, because of the characters they had in the team, they had some, really good players, and you thought potentially that was the springboard to something bigger, but it obviously didn't materialise. Gus Poyet get the League Cup final, that match against Manchester City in that season, the end of the season. But in terms overall of a season, having a sort of that really rounded feeling of being good from beginning to end, this season's got to be up there, because the qualification for Europe, the fact that they, all season were a very, very difficult team to beat. Okay, they didn't, necessarily go on winning streaks of, 2 or 3 games on the bounce. They didn't lose on, those streaks either. They were a very dogged team, a very driven, ambitious team, and some of the results this season, some of the games, some of the atmospheres, and the overall mood of the Sunderland fan base, if you like, and the city and everything this year it's all combined into this one huge, I don't know, how would you describe it? It's been an absolutely incredible season, just on and off the pitch, and the feel good factor surrounding Sunderland this year has been amazing.
Yeah, Chris, for years Sunderland have basically developed a reputation for being chaotic, impatient, a club where there's a lot of short-term thinking, a club where we change direction every single year. So, now has to be, doesn't it, the most stable the club's been in our lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God, just as a segue from the World Cup, I was just thinking there when you first started talking to Nick, I remember being my lad's age, when I was your age and all that sort of stuff. I remember watching, it was that Football Focus on international weeks. And so it would have been early 90s. And I would have been desperate to see, and I'm going to name drop him here, but it's not on purpose, the likes of Andy Melville.
Come on, never
Hey,
go.
play,
Get that on
playing,
your bingo card for today.
playing for Wales. And I was desperate for Tony Norman to get a game for Wales, but obviously I had Neville Southall in front of him. I remember trying to watch Phil Grape, the highlights, see how he got on for Northern Ireland. And you were kind of looking at these, and that's pretty much all we had. And you look at this World Cup, and obviously the statistics about us having more players than Real Madrid, having more goal scorers than I remember we had more goal scorers than PSG at one point.
I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know what it
I
is
can't.
now, but we
Yeah,
were third, weren't we?
it all went quiet. But if you look at, I haven't worked it out, but work that out as some sort of percentage in terms of how many players we've provided to the World Cup in percentage terms. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I mean, it does stem from, and we might get into it obviously later on, but it does stem into it from the status of the Premier League and the maybe the balance on how far ahead the Premier League is compared to the rest of Europe. There is an imbalance there, and we've come up and we've been a bit of an example of that. It'll be interesting next season. We'll get onto that, but yeah, and it's just the way we've done it compared to recent years. Even when the biggest success in my lifetime, Nick mentioned the League Cup final, but that was a bit of on a whim where we kind of stumbled there and compared everything else that was going on around it. But it was the Peter Reid days that was the pinnacle of my time supporting Sunderland until these recent years. But that was built on Peter Reid. That was built on one person's personality, and this isn't. I mean, you could argue it's built on Kirill Louis-Dreyfus's personality, but what he's done is he's driven the high standards in all areas on and off the pitch. It's took a while to get there, I would say, off the pitch, but I think they're getting there. I think there's still work to be done, if I'm completely honest. But he's put things in place which are sustainable. So it's just like on the football side where, we've got to the point where if Christian Speakman left, which I was worried about at one point. I remember going back, you probably go back 18 months ago, 2 years, where I was saying, I'm worried about someone bigger up in the food chain poaching the likes of Speakman and Stuart Harvey. And it turned out that we outgrew them within 18 months to 2 years. And that just shows that we're putting things in place where people can leave and we know what we're doing. So we know what type of person to bring in and we know what works and what doesn't. And that's just, I mean, in some ways you can just say it's good business and it's just a good way to run any institution. And especially for a football club, which is chaotic by its nature. Chaos goes on. Look at the Granit Xhaka thing. There's a lot of clubs out there who would just crumble in that sort of situation because they haven't got the infrastructure behind the scenes. But we have. So things now we struggle to be kind of shook as a football club, whereas in the past, any sort of, going back then, Marco Gabardini leaving, Don Goodman leaving, we're worried about Kevin Phillips leaving, we're worried about Niall Quinn leaving. We knew that things might just fold, whereas now, I remember speaking to you with the Granit Xhaka thing that I wasn't all that worried about it. And it's because of the way we ran. And I just think it'll take something, even if we kind of change ownership, everything's just in place.
Yeah, and Nick, one thing supporters seem to have now is trust. Even when fans disagree with the decision, generally they trust that there's a reason behind it. So how important do you think that change in relationship between supporters and the club has been? You were talking before about the Poyet era, the Steve Bruce era. There hasn't been that trust, even though those were moments where there was a bit of success. I don't think we ever fully trusted what was going on and trusted the recruitment would always be good and trust that the changes in manager would make sense and all these other things. Where now, as Chris says, it just feels like it doesn't matter what happens, the club's in the right place. So, I mean, how important do you think that change in relationship has been?
I think it's the word I'd use as well is stability, because that's you when you go back to Steve Bruce and when you go back to Gus Poyet, that's not a word you could have used at those times, because with Steve Bruce there was the whole Darren Bent, losing Darren Bent, then not being able to keep hold of players consequently because they were on loan, and so there was a fragility about the club, and also we knew there was a fragility about the club anyway, because they went through so many managers, and that was the case for Gus Poyet and Paolo Di Canio and Martin O'Neill and so on and so on. But this season, I think what has been very, very interesting for me is the shift in tone from fans thinking and saying maybe last summer that it would be typical Sunderland, that all they wanted was to finish 17th, just stay in the Premier League. But the players and the staff at the club this season have all been as one, if you like, in talking in terms of ambition and not looking to finish the season 17th, but looking, as Luca and I spoke about in an interview towards the end of the season, how 6 weeks before the end of the season, the players all got together and as a group said, we're going for Europe. We're pushing for it. We want that. That's our ambition. I remember talking to Shamseen Talbi early in the season at Nottingham Forest about being a young player and how it must be amazing for him to be playing in, these Premier League stadiums. And he just sort of glared at me and said, well, I've played Champions League football already. This isn't anything new to me. And again, a young lad of 20 who early in the season, his whole focus was ambitious in terms of European football. And there's been that sort of shift now for fans who I think now trust the process, if you like, trust the people in charge, trust what's happening. And yes, there have been some, I suppose you say, brutal decisions taken over, various people leaving the club. But I think we're all looking at the process and where the club is now and where it's positioned itself and how it's positioned itself, as I think Tom Burwell talked about, having stayed in the Premier League this season, they now know that their finances for the next 3 or 4 years are fairly secure because of the way the parachute payments work if they were to get relegated, the way the TV money works. And that's put Sunderland in a very stable position as well. So I think the key word is stability. And as a result of that stability, people trust what the club is doing.
Chris, do you think expectations have changed quicker than even we could have imagined? Taking into account what Nick's just said there about stability and trust, all these like buzzwords, but it's so true. There is stability now. There is trust. It was only 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, we were thinking, bloody hell, are we going to be in another relegation battle after that season under Michael Beale? And now, people are genuinely discussing Sunderland as a European force, as a sustainable probability, something where it might not just be on this season, next 2, 3, 4 years, you could see Sunderland play in Europe 2 or 3 more times in those seasons. So, surely expectations have changed quicker than we could have imagined, but there is part of me as well thinks, that as mental as this football club is, I shouldn't be too surprised.
No, we probably shouldn't. But other way, before we were saying we shouldn't be surprised when things were going in the other direction. That was the conversation. That's where the whole conversation's changed. And the amount of times we've said on pods after games, because for years and years we were saying typical Sunderland for about so many things, and now we've been changing the conversation in pods. We've been saying it's typical, it's untypical Sunderland. It's the opposite to what we've always expected. But in terms of expectation, that's going to be a really interesting one, and we might get more into it when we start talking about next season. But I think, and again, it goes back to Nick's point where we were talking about stability. I think it goes back to the plan that the owners have got, and they're very, very good at shutting out outside noise, and keeping things very focused on what they want to do and what their long-term plan is. And I think I remember them saying, coming out, and I think it was after they came in the January. I think we lost in the playoff semi-final that summer when they came in League One, and they were almost saying, "Well, yeah, but actually, we don't mind a summer to be able to really start the rebuild." So they might have actually considered at that point they would have been too far ahead because they had a plan. And I think they've got a plan of where the club needs to, or where they would like the club to be. And actually, I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of where they want us to be, and where they're, we talk about the amount of owners that come into football clubs and go, I've got a 5-year plan. Well, this, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus did. He probably didn't say it out loud, and, he wasn't brash at press conferences and saying, we're going to do this and that and the other. He wasn't like, the Hollywood lot at Wrexham where they were, talking about the Premier League when they were in, even though they might get it, they might be right. One of the few to get it right in 5-year plans. But they're probably thinking, right, well, consolidate in the Premier League and then kick on. So we're probably a year or two ahead of where, in terms of finishing 7th. Now, listening to Florent Gasolfi, there's a difference between where the expectation is at the club and where the ambition is at the club. That's two different things. That it's important to have that expectation and have that bedded in realism. So you're not saying, well, we're expected to be in the Champions League because we're spending X amount of money. But it's good to have that ambition. And Florent Gasolfi his words sounded fantastic at the fixtures breakfast where he was talking about potentially getting into the Champions League. That's brilliant. But at the same time, the club internally will know where they should be, and they'll have they'll plot a plan, and they'll know this season's got that added complexity of the Europa League. So that's going to be added into it all. They're not going to say, well, because we finished 7th, the expectation is we do better than that. The ambition will be that we do better than that. But I'm not sure they'll have an expectation of that. It'll just be to have another successful season and basically to get the best out of these players, because with a lot of them, those players are on a development pathway. So they need to develop as we want them to develop to be able to do what we want to do. So it's going to be an interesting one, because the fans are going to have expectations this season, and the club are, and it's going to be a real funny one to see how it pans out, especially those first couple of months of the season.
Yeah, and someone you've got a good relationship with, Nick, is obviously Régis Le Bris. We haven't even mentioned him yet, by the way. We're talking about Florent Gasolfi and the owner, but Le Bris being the man who has led this club to a promotion and then into Europe. I mean, if someone had said to us 18 months ago we'd be sitting here preparing for Europe, I genuinely would have probably laughed myself to death. Like, I couldn't have believed it. And I know that's said quite a lot, but it is ridiculous how quickly we've kind of rose. Has he surprised you at all, considering from when go back to when you first met him and you first started to get your head around, this is the guy who I'm going to be dealing with every week. This is the guy who's going to be leading Sunderland into the future. Has he surprised you just how well he's done?
I think I'd have to be honest to say, yes, he has, because I think like everybody, if you'd suggested last summer that Sunderland would be in Europe, in the Europa League, this season coming, I think, you would have been, a few raised eyebrows about that whole notion, bearing in mind how difficult we know, previous years teams coming up from the Championship have struggled in the Premier League. And for Sunderland to achieve what they've achieved this season or last season and achieve European football, you have to say that Régis has surprised me. The other side of that coin is it took, beginning of the promotion season away at Cardiff and those opening games of the season, that's when you're starting to get to know how Régis Le Bris works, what his mannerisms were, what he would talk about, what he didn't like talking about, his relationship with the media, and you've got to know the person. And the one thing that I think became very clear early on was how his life was football. He lives and breathes football. Workaholic, is at his happiest when he's in front of a computer screen, watching football, or on the training pitch, coaching football. And I think then you've got a sense of the drive and ambition. And I think that was on top of all, just that human element of his work ethic, was also the fact you had to then factor in, he learned English for a very good reason, and that was to come to England and manage in the Premier League. And so he's got that trajectory about him as well, as humble and as quiet and as quietly spoken as he is. He is, I think, fiercely ambitious. And when you embrace all that and factor it all in, the longer the time he's been here has gone on, and he's been here one of the longest over the last 20 odd years. 2 years in the job in itself is a statement at Sunderland. but he's done it because he has a purpose and a drive, and is actually very, very good at what he does.
What would you say? What do you think has been his biggest contribution? Not tactically, but culturally. What would you say his biggest contribution's been?
I think it's his calmness and his authority. I think it was interesting towards the end of the season when he was asked about losing his temper in the dressing room, and he said, "I learned a good few years back it wasn't a good idea. It didn't end well," and so I think that assurity that he has, that calm demeanor, and it reminded me a lot of Tony Mowbray when he used to talk about this. Tony always used to talk about never get too high, never get too low. And that is Régis Le Bris. Never got upset about a defeat, never got carried away with a big win. Like he didn't, he would come in after a defeat and he would roll his eyes. I mean, that was one thing about Régis. When you get to know a coach or a manager over a period of time, there are little mannerisms that you pick up on, you notice. And I know that when Régis would walk in after a defeat, literally he said more in a facial expression than he said in a 5-minute interview afterwards.
Raising his eyebrows. That's quite
Just
a big
a rolling of the eyes or a raising of the eyebrows. And so you knew, what he inside felt about the result, but he never let that overshadow. He would never pour out, a diatribe of abuse of, this wasn't good enough. He would just be like, okay, it happens. It's football. We move on. We learn. And he's very, very grounded in that respect, which I think that's very, very good for the group as a whole. He's very good at allowing the group to manage themselves, whether it's Granit Xhaka, whether it's Luke O'Nien, whether it's Nordi McKaylee, whether it's others within that group. They, I think, have learned a group mentality, which is reflected in a very, very good team spirit, which he's allowed to, he's managed that, Régis Le Bris, from outside the group in a strange way, but he's overseen it and he knows exactly what he's doing, and engineering what is clearly a very, very good group team mentality.
Chris, you said before there about Christian Speakman when we were talking, you said, there was a point when you were worried about whether we would be able to hang on to him, and you were worried maybe bigger clubs would come along. Do you get that same feeling with Le Bris or not? That eventually somebody will go, bloody hell, this bloke at Sunderland's done a hell of a job. We should maybe be in for him.
Potentially, but in the same way that I had a feeling about Xhaka, I think we can put that into the same bracket. And just out of interest, actually, I just had a quick look when Nick said about Régis Le Bris being here for over 2 years, and he's now the 5th kind of longest serving manager in the Premier League, which is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it?
Crazy, isn't it?
Which says something. But no, I just think I think he knows, and I think managers know, just based off the stats we've just been talking about there, talking about 2 years being a lifetime in management. Managers know when they're onto a good thing at a club. And I think Alex Ferguson used to give advice to his ex-players when they used to ask for advice about which clubs to go in and manage. And he used to always say, look at the chairman, look at the owner. If that was a good owner, if it was a good setup, get yourself in there. But be careful if you don't think that they are, because it's likely to go south. So yeah, and I think he knows that he's in a good environment. He was brought in to do the job we asked him in a way, in the sense that if you remember how young that squad was in the Championship, and look at his background of coaching young players. I mean, of course, bringing likes of Enzo Lefebvre through in France, that was his background. And if you look at our transfer policy, especially last summer going into the Premier League, look at all of our signings in the attacking areas. All young, exciting players who need development. And we got experience in that defensive lineup, and then Xhaka in front of them. But the rest of that, the forward players, look, Sidiki, Diarra, Talbi, all of those wide players that you'd even throw Angulo in there. All of those were young players. And the likes, how he's developed Mayenda as well, of course, and how much money we've made on him. So he just knows he's in a good place. He's in a good place at a good time. And how many managers recently have jumped ship to go to a Chelsea or go to a Spurs, or, look at last season. And his name's completely left me, but the Brentford manager who jumped
Thomas
to
Frank.
Thomas Frank. I mean, look at that. Thomas Frank was in a good environment at Brentford. He was onto a good thing. And look, you've got to have ambition. Don't get us wrong. But in management, the grass isn't always greener. It might be a bigger club, but what does that mean? If you've got power and if you've got influence to be able to build something that you want, is that not better than going to a bigger club where you lose that influence and somebody makes the decisions for you and it goes wrong, that purely because it hasn't got that much to do with you, the decisions that are made? So I think he knows that. And it was really interesting as well, just to do a shameless plug as well for the Patrick Roberts pod. It was really interesting listening to him talk about, because I asked him about when he left the club and the feelings about some of those players who weren't getting games. And I thought his response was really interesting when he said, at no point was I forced out. I didn't feel like I was forced out. He said the manager was brilliant. He said, we want you here, but we understand your situation. And I just think that's brilliant, because we were all slightly concerned about, how does he manage that? I mean, because it's a difficult situation.
We were all worried that they were being, we were thinking, they're just being bombed out, these players.
Yeah.
But, as Patrick Roberts said, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. So I just thought that was a brilliant insight to how he talks to players, and that he says, look, this is the situation. He talks to them like people rather than, almost employees or, the usual manager-player relationship. And Patrick Roberts was like, no. And he said straight away, he laughed a bit when we said, were all the players saying, well, who's this fella coming in? And he said, yeah, but as soon as he came in, we knew he meant business. And for someone who in some ways had his Premier League chance taken away from him, he couldn't have spoke highly enough about Régis Le Bris and how he was with him, which I think says a lot when a player goes through that and he's still positive about the manager. I think that tells you everything.
Yeah. Just before we go to the break, Nick, I just want to quickly touch on this, but, Le Bris being very much I would say a very modern coach, I get the impression that while, yes, he's into everything, that he's very different to a lot of the managers we were talking about before, your Peter Reeds, your Big Sams, your Gus Poyets, where I think they love that element of control over who goes in and out of the football club and kind of having almost the biggest say on player recruitment and player sales and things. I don't know about you, but I don't get that impression with Le Bris. I think, yes, he probably does have some say to a degree, but he's very comfortable, isn't he, not being the final say on things and kind of working with what he's got. And do you think that I mean, I think it's a strength of his personally, but do you think it bothers him particularly when, players are being linked here and everywhere, that, he might potentially lose someone? Does he seems to me that he's the kind of character who just gets on with it.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think there's, I think he's probably got more control or more authority over incomings, outgoings than previous, I call them managers. And I think that's because he's got a good relationship with Florent Gisolfi, and that goes back a way. I do think one thought crossed my mind actually when the whole Xhaka thing broke. I remember you messaging me about asking about Xhaka. Suddenly it came out of the blue, and I thought, I wonder if there's a moment where Régis Le Bris has stood back and thought, oh no, is this happening to me again? It happened at Lorient, that all his best players were sold underneath him, and Lorient then went into a decline. And thankfully, that hasn't happened. But I think he's culturally comfortable living in Sunderland because of as he's often talked about, the similarities between the area of France he comes from and this area of northeast England. I think he's more comfortable in his own skin here as well, as someone who he doesn't court the media. He's not comfortable in the media spotlight. If he were to move to another club, at Chelsea or Spurs or something like that, I think that would be something at this moment in time he'd find uncomfortable. I think he's got a nice fit here at this club. I think it works well for him. He likes living here. He's got a very good, I guess, sort of community of coaches and staff who he gets on really well with. But at the same time, I mean, Chris was alluding to, Patrick Roberts talking about, we knew that Régis meant business when he came in. And when you hear the conversations that Régis talks about that he's had with Wilson Isidore and his agent, immediately, he means business.
Yeah.
He's more than happy to take on players head on and, angry players who are not playing and not getting game time. And he said himself, he enjoys that part of the game as well. He's not afraid of confrontation, but he's got such a manner about him that I think he's able to disarm people as well. So I think at the moment, everything's the right fit, the right place, the right time for him, what he's achieving, the ambition of the club, the project that they seem to be on, the trajectory the club seems to be on. It's all pretty much aligned, isn't it, at the moment? And I know football can change overnight. Things can happen very, very quickly. But I think he's in a position where he can take a step back, look at the overall picture and think, well, look, am I going to be better off anywhere else? It's careful what you wish for. Is the grass always green on the other side? I'm not so sure it is. After everything that Sunderland have achieved under him and Florian Gasolfi and the rest of the staff over the last 2 years, this is a good place to be at the moment.
Absolutely is, and a good place to be for our listeners is in the fridge grabbing a drink while we take a break. So we'll catch you after the break.
The world's biggest soccer tournament has arrived, and you can trade the entire tournament on Kalshi. On Kalshi, you can trade every match from the opening stage all the way to the final. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code CUP26 to get $10 when you trade 10. KALSHI Kalshi. Trade the beautiful game. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory.
The entire summer of soccer is on PrizePicks, all 48 countries in every matchup. And if you rep your side before the round of 16 on PrizePicks, you can win a trip to the finals in New York. It's the biggest tournament ever, which means there's even more opportunities to cash in while you root for your favorite national sides and global soccer stars. Download the app today and use code CUP26 to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Download the app today and use code CUP26 to get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. PrizePicks, America's #1 sports picks app.
Imagine buying your kid a toy only to find the batteries aren't included, or buying furniture but missing the tools to build it. Frustrating, right? Now imagine the exact same feeling, but you're paying way more. That is what buying business software usually feels like: fragmented, disconnected, and incredibly expensive. Odoo completely changes that. Odoo is a complete, fully integrated business suite where all your apps actually talk to each other. We're talking automated lead routing for your sales team, seamless AI integration, and intuitive point-and-click website builder. It's everything your business needs to scale, saving you time, headaches, and money. Stop piecing your software together. Go to odoo.com. That's ODOO.com to learn more.
And welcome back to Howie the podcast. And we were just briefly touching on the summer window there, Nick, before we went for the break. And I don't know about you, it feels like it, certainly in terms of incomings, it has been quiet, hasn't it? I don't know how much the World Cup's had an impact on that. I think the big impact is probably because we don't need to do a giant amount of business and we can be deliberate and diligent and perhaps act in a way that we did prior to last summer. Last summer was a bit of a departure, wasn't it, from the usual for Sunderland. So, like this, although yes, it is quiet, it does feel quite familiar to me, actually.
It's quiet, but I think you touched on it, the World Cup, that's going to be a factor. But I also think another factor is the fact that the season doesn't start till August the 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
So they've still got a month and a half to do business. And yes, it'd be nice to get players in early. But I think there's no panic to get players in because you've got an extended summer, if you like, in a bid to bring in. And as Régis Le Bris is saying so often at the end of last season, 3 to 4 players. Now that might be more, it might be 5 or 6 now because of Europe. But that's still not compared to last summer, that frenzy of bringing in 14, 15 players. It's much more measured now. And they will have their targets. They will have players and agents they're talking to. There are rumours about various players only this week, that the talks are quite advanced, or they're certainly interested in certain players, inevitable. But they do, as you said earlier, they do play their cards very, very close to their chest now, the club. They keep things very, very tight when it comes to information in those regards. But make no mistake, Christian Speakman always used to talk about the way they did their transfer business. They were always 2-3 windows ahead. So the players they bring in this summer, much as they did last summer, having tracked Siddiqui and Diarra and others for some time, they would have done the same with players this summer. So I don't think there's any real need to panic that they haven't brought anybody in. I also think what the Xhaka scenario illustrated is that the club do hold a lot of cards. They do have a lot of strength in terms of now they can turn away clubs who say, we want to buy Brian Broby, we want to buy Noah Siddiqui, because they've shown that they're not prepared to buckle and just, give in to the whims of another club. They can say, look, he's our player, they're under contract, they're going nowhere. And I think that Xhaka scenario is actually demonstrated not just to the fans, but I think to the players as well, that, you're not just going to walk away from Sunderland if you think you're going to get a better offer from somewhere else.
That perception of us being quiet, Chris, is it fair? I think to be fair to the football club, we tend to operate under the radar. Normally when you find out about a deal, it's kind of last minute, isn't it? It's already basically signed, sealed, the players book their medical, and then, all right, there's a story appears that Sunderland are going to sign this player. It's not very often that's not the case. So, it's only on the surface of it that it appears we're being quiet. I would imagine we are beavering away in the background.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, I think we've been beavering away in the background for, the last 6 months since the January 1 plan.
Well, I love that saying, by the way, beavering away in the background. Good, isn't it?
It was just like Andrew the other day who said boffin, and we had to stop for 2 minutes so he could stop laughing. But no, each transfer window for me, look, I think especially with the way the club's been run since Kieran Louis-Dreyfus came in, and then he brought Speakman in, and then we've gone to Gasolfi. They've always had, an objective, and each transfer window is its own thing. We can't just say, right, well, the transfer window's open, let's just buy players, and right, well, we need that. It has its different, it's almost got its different narrative, or each one's got its different story. So we go back to last summer. Last summer, we were a newly promoted side. And if you look at the players we ended up bringing in, the likes of Siddiqui, the likes of Diarra, Robin Roofs in some ways. And I can't remember who we were speaking to, but we were speaking to someone who said, I think it was the guy from The Athletic, who was the Manchester United reporter. He said a lot of these players were on the shortlists for top clubs, but all of those clubs said we wanted to give those players another year playing in their league before they took the plunge and spent 20-30 million on them. And so we moved quickly because we knew what we needed. We knew we had to strengthen right across the park. So we went in early and we went in big to make sure we got the signatures of these players who could potentially in a year, 2 years' time, be those players that big clubs wanted to spend huge money on. So, and being that newly promoted side, we had a conversation to have to persuade some of these players. I mean, go back and look how many players signed before Granit Xhaka signed. We'd already signed, I think Siddiqui had already signed because that was early July, I think, from memory. Diarra had, I think. So
Albia Dingra as well. Yeah, there was a handful, wasn't there?
So they're about 4 or 5, weren't they, before?
Yeah, exactly.
The Xhaka signing certainly opened the door to a lot more.
That opened the door to the likes of Michele, obviously, because they had that relationship, didn't they? But so this season, we're in a position of strength because clubs now look at us finishing 7th. We've got Europa League in our back pocket to say to clubs. So it's not a case of, that last season we had to be the driving force behind the transfers where we had to go out there and talk them into it. This season, we've got a bit of room to hang back a little bit and almost put the feelers out to say to players, we're interested in you. So if we do that to some of the players, they'll think back. They might hold back on moves and go, hang on, actually there's interest from Sunderland, who top half of the Premier League, flying, got Granit Xhaka in midfield. Now they've held on to him, it's another kind of string to our bow. It's, it's all these things going to the pot where it makes it a different summer. So
Well, and as Flo Gasolfi's pointed out, European football is a big carrot as well now for players.
Yeah, so I don't think we have to dive in. I think we've got enough to persuade players, so we can just bide our time. So I just think it's a different setup. It's a different window. So we shouldn't look at it, apples for apples to say, oh well, by the time it got to the, past the first or got to the halfway point in July last year, we'd signed 5 players or whatever it was. It's not the same. It's a different summer. We can go in. We might spend. Let's say we spend 100 million or something this summer. It might be on 4 players. So there's more onus on getting those 4 right than there was when you're trying to buy a new team where you're building a squad that people can rotate in and out.
Mentioned Xhaka very briefly there, and Nick, this is something which we've talked about quite a lot. I imagine you have as well on the radio the last couple of weeks, but it's been certainly the biggest story, hasn't it, of the window so far. Chelsea's interest in Granit Xhaka and all that speculation around whether he was going to leave or not. I mean, we were convinced he was probably gone, but the club stood firm, and they showed how strong they are. Basically, how significant was that moment? Did Sunderland make a statement to the rest of football? Do you think?
I think the whole Xhaka thing has been fascinating, and I think the way I sort of read the story is that it was more about Alonso than it was about Chelsea. And I think it was about the fact that Chelsea had given Alonso a contract where he's manager, not head coach. And so Alonso has got a say in who he wants to bring in and who he wants to sell.
And that's interesting, by the way, because the first big play as manager and they've failed. They've not managed to get one of his big targets.
And I just sort of get this. I do get this at the back of my mind. I'm thinking, so Alonso's come along to his bosses at Chelsea and say, well, I want Granit Xhaka. And Chelsea have gone, well, hang on a minute. He's 34 years old this year and you want to spend good money on Granit Xhaka. I just get this impression that Chelsea as a football club may have paid a bit of lip service to Alonso to keep him sweet in terms of, well, okay, we'll back you if you want Granit Xhaka. We'll make an offer. But I think the fact that they made an offer of £8 million sort of underlines the fact that Chelsea as a football club's heart wasn't in it. I just get this feeling that they were just trying to keep Alonso happy. Look, we're doing what you want. We're trying to get Alonso. And remember as well, I think there's a lot of talk when Mark Guéhi came last season and then went back to Chelsea early because of the injury situation at Stamford Bridge. And the conversation was around the good relationship that Sunderland have with Chelsea Football Club. I just think, again, it wouldn't have surprised me in the least, this is only my own opinion, that Chelsea said to Sunderland, look, we're making this offer, but it's not wholehearted. And if you dig your heels in, we're not going to pursue it, because it's not, from Chelsea Football Club's point of view, the signing that they really want to make going forwards. It was more a Xabi Alonso signing. And so I think the fact that Sunderland did dig their heels in did make it very, very clear right from the start that he wasn't for sale. I think it's a big message. It's a big, I think it's a huge moment for Sunderland in terms of where they are as a newly promoted football club. They've established themselves after a season playing European football and sent out, as I said earlier, a big message to players, not just the fans, that this is a club now. Yes, they probably will sell players down the line. That's the way the model works, but they don't have to.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to, they won't.
Yeah, it's just a very un-Chelsea-like signing. They tend to just spend 30, 40, 50, 60 million pounds on teenagers and 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds. They just don't sign players like Granit Xhaka. In fact, I would have probably been less shocked if they came in with an offer for Eliza Mayenda, because of his profile and age and the fact he plays for Spain under 21s. I mean, he's obviously the biggest departure that the club have had this summer so far. To be honest, and you might correct us on this, I don't think there'll be too many more. I think there'll be maybe a handful of big money moves out the door to try and, just give us a bit of a base to work from. It'll be players like Mayenda who weren't really near the first team. But do you think the club wanted to sell him? Because as Chris kind of alluded to before, Patrick Roberts was told when he left, look, there will be a place for you, by the way, if you do stay. I get that feeling with Mayenda, but then I also get the feeling he's ready to go and burst onto the scene somewhere, and he might not get that chance.
Probably, it's a difficult one. They probably didn't want to, but I think we knew arguably from the start of the seaon when Eliza played the first few games, scored, and then suddenly found himself sitting on the bench for the season. I can understand why he as an individual, having had that carrot dangled for him at the start of the season, then not getting involved as much later on. And there were stirrings, weren't there? There were mutterings towards the end of the season that Mayenda was restless. So it didn't come as a huge surprise. And I think when you talk about the money they've got for him, it makes it's complete sense.
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
impossible to ignore, really, that fee, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that's how that aligned, and good luck to him, because great guy, and I think he'll flourish, and he needs to play football, and that is one thing he wasn't getting at Sunderland.
Yeah, but that's kind of been my sort of retort, Chris, to fans who don't understand why we sold him. They can't get their head. So a lot of people are still like, even despite the fee, despite all the things we know about him, 8 starts last season or something like that. It's not a great amount. People are still saying, well, I wouldn't have sold him, I'd have kept him. And it's like, sometimes you've got to remember that the football club, the way it works now, we look after people. We aren't a selfish football club. We look after ourselves, as the sort of whole thing with Xhaka showed. We will look after ourselves, and we're very handy. We can do that. But at the same time, we're fair, and we're fair with young players in particular. And, to a lesser extent, Harrison Jones has been allowed to move on this summer to go and play football. I just think sometimes it's the right time to sell a player. And as Nick kind of said there, the fee was ridiculous for me. I think I really do rate him, and I think he could go on to be a top player. But can you really turn down that sort of money if you sit back and be honest about it?
No, absolutely not. I think the club, again, it's about selling at the right time. Sunderland have been so guilty in the past of hanging on to players for too long and losing value and all of that, I just think it was the right time. I think there's going to be a time for every single player to leave the club, and we're just going to see it, and we're going to have to accept it, because I think every fan, and I think actually the club probably wanted to keep him as much as the fans, but I think now we've got a really good reputation. We bring in these players, and again, going back to the likes of Siddiqui and Diarra, especially the conversations we probably had with them last summer, they both signed 5-year contracts with the club, but that's a two-way thing. That's not how you will stay here for 5 years. That is right, you sign a 5-year contract to help us out, but if the right move comes for you, we'll help you out. And we've got to have a reputation for that, or else young players, agents will turn around to their players and go, that's not the place to go, because they'll keep you against your will if you're not getting games and all that. And Mayenda had a contract till 2030.
But he signed it last year, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so you know what I mean? It's just the time, and the club have got a reputation to keep. But the other thing is, and it's funny because when we went through the season review, we kept, and it surprised me as we were going through, that actually Mayenda got more chances than you probably think when you go back. And you go back to the start of the season, and he kind of hit the ground running against West Ham. After that, there was quite a few games. I remember Bournemouth away was particularly good, but there was games like West Ham away. There was another couple of games where we were saying, actually, Le Bris threw him in, and he struggled a little bit. And if you think now, compared to, I can't remember, Gav, you probably tell us how much we actually brought him in for. How much was it in the end?
A couple of million, I think. Couple of million euro. Yeah, it wasn't very much.
If we've made around 10 times the profit on Eliza Mayenda, in someone who, if you remember rightly, shared that striking spot with Isidore in the Championship, so he hasn't really had a full season.
No.
So a player who's 21, hasn't had a full season, brilliant player, technically fantastic when he wants to be, and then he struggled at times in the Premier League. So there was still a question mark whether he could be that star. And I think he's had his chance. I think this season was his chance. And I think
also on that, because Régis Le Bris was talking about the striker situation towards the end of the season, largely because of Isidore and whether he was, what he was agitating for. But he was making it quite clear that Mayenda was third choice. It's Broby, Isidore, and Mienda's third choice. And if you're Mayenda, you're thinking, well, when am I going to get an opportunity if I'm third choice?
Yeah, but still, Nick, considering he's third choice, he's still got chances to impress.
Yeah,
if he'd really kind of tore it up when he got those chances, I mean, the way Le Bris works, he would have kept the shirt. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter who's waiting in the wings. If someone impresses, they keep the shirt. When it comes to Le Bris, he's quite loyal that way. So, and I just think he had the chances. The club thought someone who's played half a season in the Championship, scored some good goals, scored some important goals, is likely to develop and get better. But actually, I think he's another one that we probably outgrown, and we're probably overtaking his development. And to get a 20-odd million bid when you paid a couple of million for him, you just can't turn that down.
Yeah, it ultimately feels like Rennes have bought potential, really. They're buying him thinking with consistent game time, we can develop this lad and make him into a top player. And because that's what happens with French play in the French league in particular. If you've got a lad under the age of 24 and he gets between 11 and 15 goals next season, you can just guarantee he's going to get a move to a Premier League club or a Bundesliga club or even PSG. Those sorts of clubs will start circling. But Nick, with Mayenda, does this demonstrate the success of the model? Because we bought someone young, we've developed them, we've sold well, and we're about to reinvest the model. I think it's one of the best examples, and you can probably add it to the list with Job, with Ross Stewart, with Jack Clark, of us. The model in action ultimately.
You sort of answered your own question, yes, because there you go. You go back through those last few seasons: Ross Stewart, Jack Clark, Joe Bellingham, Eliza Mayenda. Every season they've sold a player, and it's generally been sold. The player's generally been sold for around £20 million, bearing in mind what they paid for them in the first place. So it clearly is a model that's working very, very well for them. And down the line, whether that they still pursue that sort of bring a young player in, and next season they sell another one for 20 million, takes the pressure off for having to sell anybody else because over your SCR rules and so on, it's income and so on. It's fascinating, and I just think it's they've stuck very strongly to their principles of underlining that they're still wholeheartedly behind the academy, and they want to see players develop through the academy, even if they're not necessarily going to make it into the first team at Sunderland. But they certainly look at the academy as an arena to develop young talent, which can bring them income. And if they can develop players like Mayenda, and as they've done over the last few seasons with the players that they sold, there's, to use that sort of crude phrase, there's a cash cow for Sunderland in that respect.
Just a quick one, Nick, about Mayenda, actually, that everyone will look to his playoff goals. His huge one at Wembley, of course, his goal at Coventry. Everyone goes back to that. But actually, I imagine Régis Le Bris will go back to him coming to the club and him looking around at what strikers he had at the time and starting that season in the Championship, because he put all his faith in Mayenda and he was his first choice because Isidore hadn't signed yet at the start of that season, and he scored 2 goals in his first home game against Sheffield Wednesday. But I imagine because he had to get up, and then he went on to win, 9 out of the first 12 or something like that. I imagine Régis Le Bris, in terms of being grateful to Mayenda, he's probably looking back to that period as being as important as those big goals he scored against Coventry and Sheffield United, isn't he?
Yeah, probably. I think also, I remember Tony Mowbray's conversations about Mayenda. He spoke incredibly highly of Mayenda on the training pitch and how powerful he was and his finishing and what a prospect he was. And as you say, when Régis brought him in and he was scoring goals, and as it's panned out, it hasn't worked out for him in terms of where he'd probably wanted to be, having started the season last season, scoring against West Ham, and he had that fantastic opportunity at Burnley as well, didn't he? But I mean, I think he must have felt then that this is going really well, and he must have been disappointed with the way the season panned out for him then. And I guess, look, as a young player, he's looking at his opportunities, he's looking to play, and the big opportunities come along with the move to France. And look, he wouldn't be the first player to return to a club down the line. It happens. As you mentioned before, Gav mentioned, he could score 11, 15 goals in France and then find himself back in the Premier League. So I think they're acutely aware that they can't stand in a player's way in terms of their development. And I think they probably do feel that Mayenda now himself and the club, they've come together and said, look, your future development does depend on you going somewhere where you're going to play more regular football.
Do you think, Nick, that keeping your best players is actually, well, certainly for Sunderland this window anyways, is actually more important than signing new ones? Because
I think it's
you've
important.
mentioned a few names before, haven't you?
Yeah, I think we were talking about earlier about they can be more targeted this summer in the players they're trying to bring in, because we know the areas that they're clearly going to be identifying as they're wanting more strength or better quality. So they can target those individual players this summer. But I do think, like you say, it's very, very important now with the profile that the likes of Siddiqui have had at the World Cup, that they are very strong in keeping these players now and saying, look, you're here now, you're here for next season. We can look at how next season goes as to whether you move on in a year's time or 2 years' time. Because if you carry on playing as you are now, your value is going to increase exponentially over the next couple of seasons. And you will get, we're not going to stand in your way after 2 or 3 years here. I think that's the way it's probably going to pan out. But I think it will be important to drive home that message, which I think they've done to a certain extent with the Xhaka situation, that they're just not going to let players go if they get a whim. One of them comes and says, oh, I want to go to Man United, or I want to go to Arsenal, or I want to go to Chelsea. I think Sunderland are now in a much stronger position to say, well, no, you've got 4 years left on your contract and you're an integral part of this team. And I think we know the way that Régis Le Bris talks about this 16, which made him move up to 20 trusted players, that those players are part of that. And are they necessarily going to find moving, they're going to become part of a trusted group that are going to play regularly in the Premier League? I think, Sunderland do hold, they've got strength in that situation at the moment.
I mean, we've talked a lot about outgoings then. There aren't many names in terms of incoming, so I'm not going to ask you to specifically name players here, but what sort of areas of the pitch do you think we do need to target them? Because, like I say, it's only a handful, really, isn't it?
I think that wingers is clearly an area that they keep coming back to.
Well, we've lost two. We've lost two on the right, haven't we? So,
and I think it was clearly an area last season, because they went through so many players in those positions that they will look to nail and try and get some consistency on both left and right wing. I think the issue of strikers is still pertinent. Mayenda going, I think they still need another. Defence-wise, left back is probably more priority than right back. And they probably, whilst they've got cover at centre backs, I think they'll look for someone else. So I think you're looking at the spine, aren't you? You're looking at forwards, wings, central midfield. I wouldn't say it's urgent, but then your full-backs and maybe an extra centre back. But I mean, none of these I'd say are, none of it's critical. But I think with the way the season is going to pan out with Europe and the Premier League the way it is, they will need the strength and depth. They will need that. And they can step up the quality now in terms of who they're looking to bring in, just to increase the quality within the overall squad as well.
There's been a little bit of talk, Chris, actually this week from our listeners when I was reading through the questions that we've got for the Q&A pod this week about, maybe bringing somebody in to battle with Ronaldo, bringing in somebody to battle with Xhaka. Is like, we're not really talking about those positions, but do you think that's quite important, actually, given the age of those, because they're not over the hill, but if Xhaka or Ronaldo get injured, who comes in? It's a bit of a mystery.
100%. That will. I mean, look at Ronaldo's disciplinary record for a start. Never mind his fitness record. He's liable.
He's got to avoid kicking someone in the nuts next season, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's liable to a moment. Let's say. So we definitely need some cover. We definitely need a left back. I think that's one of the highest on the priority list. Xhaka is going to be the same, because I think you'll find that it'll be interesting to see how they negotiate the Premier League games after a week away somewhere, wherever we get drawn, whether it's up in Hearts like we're expecting, up in a quick train journey and back down, and then they can play on the Sunday or whatever. But if we've got long journeys into God knows where, into Europe, and then we're playing the following weekend, be interesting to see how Xhaka's workload gets spread around. So then who do we go in? I did I did think that there was times again when we went through the review that the midfield three at times of Diarra, Siddiqui and Lafay as a three actually worked at times. I think they were fantastic in some games. If you go back and look at those three, I think actually Burnley at home was one of them from memory. But yeah, we might rotate it like that. So it might not be someone who goes like for like, comes out for Xhaka. So we might not specifically get a defensive midfielder. We might deal with it in the shape and bring different players in. But the wide positions are obvious, like Nick said. So I think we're expecting players to come in there. Although I do think Angulo's looking at how he's gone into the World Cup. I think he could be set for a big season. And I think that's what he's probably thinking. He's had his big move. He's had his World Cup. And he's probably wanting to hit the ground running this season. Just on the outgoings, just quickly, because I'm not sure whether I slightly disagree, Nick, or might have a different take on the outgoings, because I completely agree that it does give Sunderland the power to knock bids back. But I do think with the way that the position we're in, if you look at the Brightons and the Brentfords, how they've done it, we might do things differently. Who knows? But there might be a case that if we get a bid of, I don't know, 70, 80 million, or well, if you look at Anderson, let's say a bid of 100 million comes in for Siddiqui from a Real Madrid, something ridiculous. I do think the club are going to be fair to those players and say, look, we've had this bid from a ridiculously big club. And they'll probably sit down and have a conversation and say, this is kind of what they bought these players for. And in some ways, that they have 2 years with us, you sell them for twice as much and you reinvest the money on 2 or 3 players. So I do think that, yes, it gives us the power to knock bids back, and the ridiculous bids like you talked about with the Granit Xhaka situation with Chelsea. If teams try to lowball us, we've got a lot of power in that sense. But I do think if big offers come in, I do think Kasolfi's probably looking at those young players thinking all of those have got a price tag, whether it's 80 million, whether it's 100 million, whatever it is, and a level of club where the club can say, look, it's a Champions League club, so we know they're offering you something that we can't offer you. So I do wonder whether in those situations there's going to be that conversation and the club want to almost sometimes plan to take those and take...
I don't disagree with you on that, because I think I've always felt there'd be maybe one marquee departure each season. I do wonder then, problem is I guess your 2 marquee players in the World Cup are Broby and Siddiqui. What if 2 clubs come in offering 80, 90 million for the 2 of them? Do you let them both go, or do you not let either of them go, or do you let one go? I think Flo Kasolfi, they're going to have to sit down very, very seriously and think, look, we've got to be practical about this and pragmatic about big transfer fees. And if we do get offered really good money, it's probably not good business sense not to sell, because it also eases your SCR over the next few seasons and puts you in a strong position to buy. And it'd be very interesting to see if they do get a scenario where someone does come in with a big offer for one of the players. I think if it's only one, I think the club will be minded to sell. But if it's more than one, I think then there are some difficult decisions to make, because you don't want to sort of pull the rug from underneath your own feet, having established yourself in the Premier League and looking to establish a good team that can compete in 2 competitions, Europe and the Premier League, and then suddenly start losing your best players.
Yeah, I do just want to quickly bookmark the outgoings in that, and Gav will tell you that my reaction to the Granit Xhaka rumours with Chelsea was a bit of a shrug of the shoulders, if I'm completely honest, because Gav, you might have used the word at the beginning, I can't remember, but the faith that I've got in Florian Kasolfi and his recruitment team, it doesn't faze me if any player leaves this squad. I'd be disappointed, don't get us wrong, but it doesn't faze me like big players have left in the past. I think the club have got a contingency plan for any player leaving, and I've got faith that they would have a plan and it would work out.
I agree with you on that. Sorry, Gav. It's something I said a few weeks ago, that Xhaka thing. I thought that the way that Kasolfi's done his business and the way that he's spoken, I'd have absolute faith and trust in them, not losing sleep over losing an individual player because of the way that they've set the recruitment up. You can only look back at what they did last summer and think, well, you've just got to trust them that they can fill those gaps.
Yeah. Well, even now I'm reading, Italian outlets are writing that Sunderland are in for John Lusumi again, and Muharremovic is the guy we spoke to James Copley about on the pod the other day. These are international quality, highly rated. Juventus are also in for these players according to these reports. So we've got a plan for every player leaving, I would imagine, and we're actually probably thinking several years ahead. Like, we're probably thinking next year's big sale will be one of these 2 or 3 players. This is our plan in case this happens. This is how we're going to get ready for it. It just, as you kind of said, Chris, got complete faith in the club to just get the job done now, and you don't even worry about them having a misstep, do you? You worry, you see other football clubs in the same league as us, them lot up the road being one of them, where you see the moves they're making in the transfer window, and you do, even though you're not obviously a fan of that club, you cringe a little bit, and you're like, bloody hell, like if I was a mag, I'd be absolutely cacking me pants about some of the business they're doing, the players they're losing, and who they're replacing them with. And I just don't get that feeling with us. And it's made being a fan so easy this last couple of years. We've been able to concentrate on football and just being good supporters, and getting behind the players and having faith that these are good people that we're bringing into the football club. And
I think it's worth bearing in mind as well. Players talk, and players will have been speaking to each other about Sunderland. So if there's anybody on the radar, they know each other, and those conversations, I'm sure, will be, I imagine nothing but good coming out of Sunderland, and the players will be sort of saying, look, don't diss a move to Sunderland. This is a fantastic place to come. It's a fantastic club, and look what they've achieved. So I think there's a lot to be said for that sort of that market. That what the players talking to each other as well,
and not just players, Nick, but we've just hired Jose Font as a coach, which was announced, and very close to Ronaldo as a player. They played together, won the league together at Lille. So players talking to coaches and saying, you've got to think Ronaldo will have said, come to Sunderland, it's great, and it is just so refreshing, isn't it?
Well, I was going to say, Gav, you mentioned when you were talking on a pod the other day, I can't remember which one it was, but you were reading out the messages saying good luck to Elijah Mayenda from not just current players, but ex-players, players who've left the club. It's like saying good luck to them, like they're still close. And you've got Bellingham as well, still talking about Sunderland, even though he's left. He keeps mentioning how much he enjoyed it and all this sort of stuff. And in some ways, he probably looks at us and regrets his move in maybe slightly, considering how it all played out. But yeah, Nick's absolutely right. And again, going back to the conversation with Patrick Roberts, full of praise for the club and the management.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it there, chaps. That's been a great way to spend an hour or so. It's probably been a lot longer than that. I haven't been keeping time. And thank you very much, Nick. We've kept you for a long time. I appreciate it. And thank you, Chris. Hope you enjoyed being on the other side today, mate.
No bother, I survived, mate. I got through it.
Survive, yeah. There was no need to be nervous, was there? Thank you very much to our listeners. As we always say, there's lots to get caught up on, and there's lots coming up, so make sure you stick with Howie the podcast. We will be back tomorrow with another episode. We'll see you then.